She left her body on an operating table, and woke up in a place more real than Earth, where rivers knew her name and light had a heartbeat. But what should have been the end was only the beginning. From a garden that whispered secrets of creation to standing before the throne of God Himself, her journey through heaven shattered everything she thought she knew. Until a voice thundered, "You're not supposed to be here yet."
I was 14 when everything changed, but before that, life was pretty normal. I grew up in a small town, surrounded by family who cared for me. We weren't overly religious, but we did go to church on some Sundays. I knew about God, believed in Him in a simple way, like a child does. I prayed sometimes, usually when I was scared or needed help. But I didn't really know Him, not in a deep, personal way. At school, I was just like any other kid. I had a few close friends, did okay in my classes, and tried not to stand out too much. I was quiet, more of an observer than someone who jumped into things. But there was one thing about me that wasn't like everyone else, my back. From the outside, you couldn't always tell, but I had scoliosis, and it was getting worse. My spine was curving more each year, and it was starting to affect my breathing and movement. Doctors told my parents that I needed major surgery, the kind that takes hours and carries real risks. I remember sitting in that office, hearing words like metal rods, spinal fusion, and recovery. It didn't feel real at first. I was scared but tried to be brave. Everyone kept telling me how strong I was. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a kid facing something way too big for her. As the surgery date got closer, I tried not to think too much about it. I hung out with my friends, watched movies, and pretended everything was fine. But at night, when it was quiet, I would lie in bed and wonder, what if I don't wake up? What happens if something goes wrong? I didn't know then that I was about to step into something far bigger than surgery. Something I couldn't have imagined, not even in my wildest dreams. What I experienced next would change how I saw everything, life, death, even God. But before that moment came, I was just a teenage girl, scared of the unknown, and holding on to hope the best way I knew how. The day of the surgery felt like it came too fast. One minute I was being wheeled through the bright, cold halls of the hospital, and the next I was staring up at the ceiling lights in the operating room. The doctors and nurses were moving around quickly, talking in calm voices. I remember the mask coming over my face and the strong smell of something sterile. One of the nurses smiled at me and told me to count backwards. I barely got past 97 before everything went black. But then something strange happened. I wasn't gone. I was awake, but not in the way I expected. I opened my eyes and realized I wasn't lying on the table anymore. I was floating. I looked down and saw my own body on the operating table. My back was exposed, and the surgeons were already working. I saw the tools, saws, clamps, even chisels. It didn't frighten me. It didn't even look painful. It just looked distant. Like I was watching someone else. I noticed 4 people in the room, dressed in blue scrubs. I could see everything so clearly, every detail. The shine of the metal tools. The way the light bounced off their masks. My senses were sharper than ever. But at the same time, everything felt calm. Completely still. There was no fear, no confusion, no pain, just peace. A kind of peace I had never felt before. It wrapped around me like a blanket. The room felt heavy with focus, like time had slowed down. But I wasn't afraid. I felt weightless, like I was floating in water but without the pressure or sound. It was silent, but not empty. There was a sense of presence, like I wasn't alone, though I couldn't see anyone yet. As I hovered there, I felt a soft pull, like something was calling me, not with words, but with a quiet invitation. And then I noticed a soft, glowing light above me. It wasn't harsh or bright. It felt warm. Safe. It was coming from above the ceiling, and without thinking, I began to rise toward it. I didn't know what was happening or where I was going. But somehow, deep inside, I knew it was okay to follow. I wasn't scared anymore. something in me had already let go. As I continued to float above my body, I took in everything around me. The operating room looked so different from up there. It wasn't just a room anymore, it felt like a space between two worlds. I noticed how small my body looked on the table, how quiet and still it was, even with all the movement around it. The surgeons were focused, steady. I could see every motion they made, the precision in their hands. I even noticed tiny details I would have never paid attention to before, like how one of the nurses tapped her fingers nervously or how a drop of sweat rolled down the doctor's temple. I saw the lights above the table. They were so bright, but they didn't hurt my eyes. Everything was clearer than I'd ever seen before. I could see the fibers in their uniforms, the tiniest marks on the tools. I could even see the curve of my exposed spine and the way the skin had been pulled back. But none of it scared me. It felt like I was observing it from a quiet distance, like I was just watching it all unfold without any emotion tied to it. What struck me the most was the silence. There were no sounds, even though I could see mouths moving and machines flashing. It was as if I had stepped into a deeper kind of stillness, one that didn't belong to the world I knew. And within that silence was something even deeper, peace. A complete, pure peace that made everything else fade away. As I hovered there, I realized I wasn't breathing. I wasn't thinking in the usual way either. It was more like I was just aware. I existed, fully and clearly, but without the noise of the physical world. There was no fear. No pain. No sadness. Just this strange, beautiful calm. That's when I felt something shift. I turned slightly, and that soft glowing light above me seemed closer now. It wasn't like any light I'd seen on Earth. It didn't hurt or blind. It welcomed. It felt like home, even though I didn't understand how. I could feel it calling me, not with sound, but with something stronger, something like love. Deep, powerful, and familiar. I began to rise again, slowly but surely, through the ceiling. Not like going through a door, but more like slipping through a dream. I passed through the walls and into a space that wasn't dark, but also not like the sky. It felt open, endless. There was no fear in me anymore. Only wonder. Where was I going? I didn't know. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of not knowing. I was just ready. As I moved higher, the light above me grew stronger, but not in a blinding way. It felt alive, like it had its own heart and mind. It wasn't just light, it was something more, something that knew me. I didn't walk or fly toward it. I was drawn, gently pulled, like a leaf floating on a quiet river. There was no effort. I simply followed. The path ahead wasn't made of anything solid, yet I could see it clearly. It looked like a beam, but not like any beam I had seen before. It shimmered, almost like sunlight bouncing off water, but it had depth. I could feel warmth coming from it. Not a physical warmth, but something that touched my spirit. A warmth that made me feel safe, accepted, and completely loved. It stretched out before me, not in a straight line, but winding softly upward. Every part of it seemed to glow, like it was guiding me home. I couldn't see where it ended, but somehow, I trusted it. There was no fear or hesitation. I just knew this was the way. As I followed the path, the air around me changed. Earth slowly faded behind me, and something new took its place. The light grew brighter, the colors around me shifted into soft golds and blues, and the space felt more open, almost endless. I felt like I had stepped out of time. Nothing rushed. Everything was still, but alive. There was a sense of being deeply known. Not just seen, but fully understood. Every part of me, every thought, every feeling. And yet, there was no judgment. Only love. The kind of love that doesn't need words or reasons. I wasn't walking anymore. I was simply moving forward, surrounded by light, wrapped in peace. The space I entered next wasn't like anything on Earth. It didn't feel like air or sky. It felt like presence. Like the very atmosphere was made of spirit and life. And just ahead, I began to see the edge of something new, green, vibrant, and wide open. I didn't know it then, but I was crossing from the world I knew into a place far more real than anything I had ever experienced. When I stepped fully into that place, I knew I wasn't anywhere on Earth. It felt like I had walked into a dream, only this dream was more real than anything I had ever known. Everything around me was alive, not just in the way we think of life, but in a deeper, more spiritual way. The first thing I noticed was the grass. It was the greenest green the first had ever seen. Almost glowing, like it had light inside of it. Each blade was perfect, standing tall and gently swaying, even though I didn't feel any wind. I crouched down and stared at it. It moved as if it was breathing, as if it knew I was there. And it wasn't all moving the same way. Each blade had its own rhythm, yet they moved together, like a choir singing in harmony. I reached out to touch it, but I didn't need to. I could feel it with my spirit. I leaned in close, and somehow my vision changed. I could see every tiny detail, lines, textures, even the inside of the blade. It was like looking through a microscope, but I wasn't using my eyes the way I do here. It was more like I could see everything all at once, from every angle, in full clarity. And what amazed me most was the feeling that these blades of grass were alive in a way that felt holy. They weren't just plants. They had a purpose, a presence. And somehow, I knew, God knew every single one. I stood up and looked around. The sky above me wasn't like Earth's sky. It was blue, but deeper. It shimmered in places, almost like it had layers of light flowing through it. There were no clouds, no sun, yet everything was perfectly lit. It was warm, but not hot. The air felt light and full. Every breath, if you could call it breathing, was refreshing, like it gave me energy instead of taking it. In every direction, there was beauty. Rolling hills, bright colors, trees that stretched high into the sky, and flowers that pulsed with color. Nothing stood still, yet nothing rushed. Even the light moved, like it was part of a rhythm that I could feel deep inside me. I didn't hear music with my ears, but there was a sound, gentle, peaceful, like a hum, that surrounded everything. And it felt like everything was singing the same song of joy, of life, of praise. It wasn't just nature. It was creation, alive and aware. And I felt alive too, more than I ever had before. I wasn't just seeing it, I was part of it. I belonged there. And even though I had just arrived, something in me knew, I had been here before. Maybe not in body, but in soul. This place was familiar. It was home. As I walked farther into this new place, I noticed a soft slope ahead that led to a garden. The moment I saw it, my heart swelled. It wasn't just beautiful, it was breathtaking. This garden wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. The colors were so vivid they almost glowed. The flowers were huge, some as wide as my shoulders, and their petals looked like they were made of silk and light at the same time. Each flower was a color I couldn't quite name. There were shades of pink, blue, and orange that I had never seen on Earth. They didn't just sit still, they moved slightly, as if they were stretching or turning to greet me. I walked among them, in complete awe, not wanting to blink. Every time I focused on one flower, I'd spot another behind it that was just as amazing. The scents in the garden were like music. They didn't just smell sweet, they filled me up inside, like they had emotions attached to them. Some reminded me of home, others of moments I hadn't remembered in years. I breathed in deeply and felt peace rush through me like a warm breeze. I didn't want to leave. I didn't even want to move. I wanted to stay in that moment forever. There were fruit trees too. Their trunks were strong and wide, and their branches were heavy with fruit I had never seen before. Some looked like apples but glowed softly. Others were round, smooth, and deep purple. I didn't eat any, but I somehow knew they tasted like joy. Not just sweet, joyful. Just standing near them made me feel lighter. What surprised me most was the way everything seemed to know I was there. The flowers, the trees, even the ground, they felt aware, not in a scary way, but in a warm, welcoming way. Like they were happy to see me. I looked up at the sky again and felt this sudden wave of emotion. Not sadness, not happiness. Something deeper. A longing that had just been answered. I didn't even know I'd been searching for something all my life until I stood in that garden and realized, this is what I've always wanted. Peace. Beauty. Love. It was all here, and I was part of it. And one thought came to my mind, so clear it felt like it had been spoken, this is how it was always meant to be. As I continued walking through the garden, something in the distance caught my eye. It stood tall, far taller than any of the other trees around it. At first, I could only see its top stretching into the sky, but the closer I got, the more I realized how massive it truly was. This wasn't just any tree. It had a presence. A kind of quiet power that made everything around it feel small. It stood at the very center of the garden, as if everything else had been placed around it on purpose. Its trunk was wide, wider than any house I'd ever seen. The bark was dark and strong, but it shimmered slightly, almost like it had a hidden light beneath its surface. Its branches moved slowly, like arms waving through water, even though there wasn't a single breeze. Some branches reached out far and wide, while others curled in gentle loops. They moved independently of each other, but there was a pattern to it, a rhythm, like the tree was breathing. There was something alive about it, not just physically, but spiritually. I could feel a strong energy coming from it. Not loud or wild, but deep, ancient, and steady. It felt like truth itself was pulsing from its roots. As I stood there staring at it, I felt two things at once. The first was awe. This tree was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was beautiful in a way that was almost too much to take in. I wanted to know it, to understand it. But the second feeling was caution. I knew I could walk toward it, but I also knew I couldn't touch it. Not because someone told me not to, but because something inside me just knew. This tree wasn't to be handled. It was holy. I stepped closer, carefully. My heart was beating faster, but not out of fear, more like wonder. I had questions forming in my mind, though I wasn't sure where they were coming from. I wondered what this tree really was. I wondered what lived inside it, what it had seen, what it knew. As I reached the base of the trunk, I saw a small opening, like a hollow space, just large enough to peer into. I bent down slowly and looked inside. It felt like a sacred moment, like I had been invited to learn something secret. And yet, I was still careful. I didn't touch the bark, didn't lean too close. Inside the hollow, I didn't see darkness. I saw light, soft and golden, and the image of a small creature, like a squirrel, appeared in front of me. It wasn't physically there, but more like a vision. And with it came a question in my mind, one I hadn't thought to ask. How are squirrels made? The moment I wondered it, I was shown the answer. Not with words, but with vision. I saw the whole life cycle of the animal, from beginning to end, in fast motion, but with full understanding. It was like the knowledge had been given to me all at once, without confusion. I took a step back, overwhelmed and amazed. This tree held knowledge, deep and wide. It knew things I had never thought to ask. I stood there, surrounded by peace, and felt like I was standing in the very heart of wisdom itself. Standing near the great tree, I realized something even more incredible. Every time I had a question, the answer came to me instantly. I didn't need to speak. I didn't even need to fully form the words in my mind. The moment curiosity stirred in me, I knew the answer, clear and full, as if it had always been there. It started with the squirrel. I had seen its image inside the hollow, and just by wondering how it came to be, I received a vision of its life. Its birth, how it grows, how it survives. I saw its little heartbeat, its fur forming, even how it interacts with nature. It was all so fast, yet I understood every part. It was like time slowed down just enough for me to grasp it, then sped back up once I did. That's when I started wondering more. What about rabbits? I thought, almost playfully. And right away, there they were, tiny, wriggling forms turning into strong, alert creatures, hopping through the grass, raising their young. I watched their full lifespan unfold before me. Again, no words. Just pictures, sounds, and a deep knowing. I understood not only how they lived, but why they mattered in the balance of life. Then I thought about fish. I don't know why, but I did. And instantly, I saw their world, beneath the surface of water, their movements, their purpose, the way they sense light and sound. I saw how they fit into a greater system. It wasn't just science, it was design. I felt the intention behind it all. My thoughts moved to people. I didn't even form a full question before a flood of understanding washed over me. I saw life forming, cell by cell, heartbeat by heartbeat. I saw emotion, relationships, the connection between souls, how we're shaped by love, by pain, by choice. I saw how each person is known, seen, and cared for in ways we can't begin to imagine. It was like every answer was already there, waiting. And I wasn't just learning facts. I was understanding truth. Truth that went deeper than logic. It felt like a download, but not from a machine, from something alive. Holy. Pure. I was receiving wisdom, not just information. And it wasn't overwhelming in a bad way. It was beautiful. I didn't feel burdened. I felt full, like I had been thirsty my whole life and was finally drinking real water. I had never known that learning could feel like worship. I stood still, my heart open, my mind flooded, knowing without doubt, this was knowledge from God. After I stepped away from the tree, I noticed something shimmering off to the side, just beyond a small hill. I walked slowly, still filled with the wonder of everything I had seen. As I reached the top of the hill and looked down, I saw a river flowing gently through the valley. It wasn't wide or fast, but it glowed with a kind of light that came from within. The water was the clearest blue I'd ever seen, brighter than any ocean or lake on earth. It sparkled like it had stars inside it. I felt drawn to it, the same way I had been drawn to the path of light before. There was something peaceful and welcoming about it. I walked down the hill and stood at the edge. As I leaned forward to look in, something happened that stopped me in my tracks. The water moved. It didn't move like a regular current. It lifted, just slightly, curling upward as if it was reaching out to me. The way it moved felt personal, like it knew I was there. And not just that I was standing there, it knew me. The water acknowledged me, responded to me, like it had been waiting for me to arrive. I stared in amazement. I had never seen anything like it. There were a few small fish in the water, swimming slowly, and even they seemed aware. Nothing in this place was dull or unaware. Everything had life. Not just life in the physical sense, but spiritual life. A kind of awareness that's hard to explain. Everything here had purpose. Everything responded with love and welcome. I crouched down and watched the river flow, its surface still sparkling and shifting with light. I didn't need to touch it to feel connected to it. Just being near it filled me with peace. It wasn't just water. It was something more. Something sacred. I realized in that moment that in heaven, nothing is separate from God. Not the trees, not the flowers, not even the river. Everything is part of His presence. Everything reflects His love. Everything lives because He lives in it. And I felt, once again, like I belonged, not just in a place, but in a living, breathing creation that recognized me as one of its own. I don't remember making a decision to leave. One moment, I was standing near the river, surrounded by peace, beauty, and life like I had never known. The next moment, I felt something shift. It was gentle, but firm, like a pull. Not painful, not harsh, just a quiet sense that it was time. Everything in me wanted to stay. I wasn't scared of going back. I just didn't want to leave. This place, this feeling, it felt more like home than anything I had ever known. I felt whole here. Safe. Seen. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel out of place. But somehow, I also knew, I wasn't done yet. My time there wasn't meant to last forever. At least not yet. I didn't see anyone tell me to return. I didn't hear a voice. It was more like a knowing that filled my whole being. A quiet message written on my spirit, not yet. And then it happened fast. I was being pulled backwards, like falling gently but without control. The light around me faded. The colors softened. The warmth began to slip away. And then, I felt a jolt, like hitting water after a long fall. I was back in my body. The first thing I noticed was the weight. My body felt heavy, so heavy. Breathing felt strange, almost like trying to push air through something tight. The bright peace of heaven was gone, and in its place was a dull ache, inside and out. The room was dim, filled with sounds, machines beeping, voices murmuring. I was in the recovery room, and I knew it instantly. I opened my eyes slowly. Everything looked flat, gray, dim. The colors I had seen in heaven made the real world look pale in comparison. Even though the sun was shining outside, it felt like a shadow. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I was still too tired. My body was weak, but my heart was full, and torn. I had just come back from a place that felt like it had always been waiting for me. And now I was back in the world I had left behind, changed, but not sure how to explain it. Part of me had stayed behind, and I knew I'd never see things the same way again. The days after the surgery were slow and painful, but not just because of my body. It was everything. The world around me felt faded. The first time I looked out the hospital window, the sky was clear and the sun was shining, but it all looked gray to me. Not cloudy, just dull. As if someone had taken the color out of everything. Before the surgery, I used to love that hospital courtyard. It had flowers, trees, and a little bench where I liked to sit. But when my mom wheeled me out there a few days after I woke up, I couldn't feel the same way. The garden was still there, the colors were still bright by normal standards, but compared to what I had just seen, it felt lifeless. Like the flowers were only half alive. Like the trees were just standing there, instead of singing. I listened to the people around me, nurses walking by, my mom speaking gently, even the birds chirping, but it all felt distant. No sound had the depth or richness of the silence I heard in heaven. That silence wasn't empty, it was full. But here, even the noise felt thin. I wasn't sad exactly. Just disconnected. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I kept thinking about the grass that moved like it had breath, the river that recognized me, the tree that held knowledge in its roots. I looked at the grass under the hospital bench and thought, this isn't alive the way that was. Everything felt smaller here. Dimmer. And for the first time, I realized how blind we all are to what's really around us. It was like heaven had peeled away a layer, showing me what life could be, what it was always meant to be. I didn't have the words back then to explain it. I just knew the world wasn't the same. Or maybe it never had been. I was the one who had changed. As time passed, life slowly returned to normal, or at least, it looked that way on the outside. I went back to school, finished 8th grade, and tried to keep up with everything. But deep inside, I was never the same. After what I had seen and felt, the world felt too small, too quiet. And I didn't know what to do with the memory of heaven. I tried talking about it once or twice, but it always came out strange. People smiled politely, nodded, and changed the subject. I stopped bringing it up. I didn't want to seem weird or different. I was a teenager, and like most kids my age, I just wanted to fit in. But inside, I felt like I didn't belong anymore. It was like part of me was always somewhere else. That feeling became hard to live with, especially when no one around me could understand it. In high school and later in college, I started to push those memories down. I told myself it had just been a dream, a side effect of the surgery. I tried to explain it away with logic. But the truth was, I didn't want to carry the weight of it anymore. I didn't want to feel like the strange girl who saw heaven. So I started running. Not literally, but spiritually. I turned away from anything that reminded me of that world. I stopped going to church. I stopped praying. I told myself God was real, sure, but he was far away. I still believed in him, but I didn't want to be close to him. It made things too complicated. In college, I found a way to numb the parts of me that still remembered. It started with smoking weed. It made the memories fade for a little while. It quieted the part of me that felt too much. After that came alcohol, and parties, and pretending to be someone I wasn't. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I smiled when I needed to. But I was slipping farther and farther away from who I really was. There were nights I would lie in bed, high or drunk, and remember the garden. The grass. The river. The love. And I would feel so far from it all, like I had shut a door that I didn't know how to open again. And yet, I still longed for it. I didn't hate God. I just felt like I wasn't worthy of that kind of love anymore. So I hid, from him, from myself, from the truth of what I had seen. And the more I hid, the darker things got. It happened during one of my lowest points. I had been at a party, one of many by that time. The night was a blur, music too loud, drinks passed around, and smoke thick in the air. I don't even remember exactly what I took. Weed, alcohol, maybe something else. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to feel nothing. At some point, the noise became too much, and I slipped away into a quiet room. I sat down on the floor, my back against the bed, knees up, and my head resting on them. I remember feeling dizzy, like the room was tilting. And then everything went still. Then, just like before, I wasn't in my body anymore. I lifted out of myself, not slowly, but all at once. There was no pain, no fear, just that same strange peace. But this time, I wasn't alone. In the corner of the ceiling, a soft light appeared, and through it stepped a figure, a woman in white. She didn't speak, but I knew she was there for me. I had seen her once before. She felt like peace, like safety. She reached down and took my wrist gently, and we rose together. We went up, straight through the ceiling, into the night. I could see the rooftops, the city streets, the power lines shrinking below us. Then we went higher, faster, into the clouds. Everything became darker, but the light around us stayed the same, calm and steady. We passed through the clouds and into the stars. Space opened around us, black and wide, filled with points of light. It was so quiet, but not empty. It was full of presence, full of wonder. I looked down and saw the earth, glowing softly in the distance. I knew I was far from it now, far from the pain and confusion that had followed me for years. We kept rising, and I began to feel something up ahead. Not a sound or a sight, but a pull. A deep, loving presence that was calling to me. I didn't see a face or hear a voice, but I felt it in every part of who I was. It was drawing me in, pulling me towards something greater than I could explain. It wasn't just light. It was home. And then I saw it. To my right, there was a city, surrounded by walls that glowed white with light. The walls stretched high, and around them were gates, tall and beautiful. The entire city seemed alive, filled with light and love. And I knew, this was heaven. Not because someone told me, but because my spirit remembered it. I wasn't floating anymore. I was being welcomed. Everything in me responded to that place. The peace I had searched for in all the wrong places, the love I had tried to forget, it was all right there, waiting for me. And I wanted to run to it. I wanted to fall into it. The angel beside me didn't speak, but she stayed close. And I knew I wasn't dreaming. I was really there, standing just outside the gates of a place more real than anything I'd ever known. The city before me was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Its walls rose high, pure white, glowing from within. They weren't made of stone or any material I could name. They seemed to be built from light itself, solid, yet soft. Every edge shimmered gently, not in a way that hurt your eyes, but in a way that made you want to stare forever. It was beautiful. Holy. Alive. Around the walls were gates, tall, arched, shining with a gold-like glow. I counted them, one by one, and I believe there were 12. Each pair of gates stood opposite another, forming a perfect circle around the city. At each gate stood an angel, tall, glowing beings of light and power. They were calm but serious, like guardians who loved fiercely and protected without fear. As I got closer, I felt the air change. There was no air like we know it, but the atmosphere carried something greater, a weight of love. Not heavy, but full. It pressed gently on me, like a blanket made of peace and joy. It filled every part of me, like the love I'd been missing all my life had finally come to wrap itself around me. There was a long line of people waiting to enter one of the gates. They stood quietly, peacefully, side by side, with no pushing or impatience. Everyone seemed to know they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The line stretched far, maybe half a mile or more. I joined it without hesitation. It felt right. At the front of the line stood a massive angel. He was unlike any being I had ever seen. Towering at least 15 or 20 feet tall, he wore robes of glowing white. His face was kind, but strong, and he had a long beard that flowed like silk. In his hands was a large book, thick, ancient, glowing softly. It wasn't a normal book. Its pages looked like light and paper woven together. One by one, people approached him. He would look down, run his glowing finger across the pages, and either welcome them in or gently pause them. No one argued. Everyone trusted him completely. He wasn't just a guard. He was a gatekeeper, divinely placed, full of authority and love. As I waited in line, I couldn't stop looking at the city. I rose slightly, floating just above the ground, and looked over the wall. Inside, I saw rooftops of buildings made of what looked like glass and gold. Pathways ran through gardens and open spaces. And everywhere I looked, there was light, not just from the sky, but from the city itself. It was alive with joy. A place where no sorrow could ever enter. The closer I got, the more I felt drawn in. The love pouring from the city wasn't just general, it felt personal. It knew me. It remembered me. It called to me like a parent calls a child home. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. As I waited in line outside the gates, I couldn't help but lift myself higher, almost like floating without trying. My spirit wanted to see more. I hovered up above the wall, just enough to peek inside. What I saw made everything I'd seen before feel small by comparison. There was a great pathway made of something like gold, but it shimmered with other colors too, like crystal and rainbow light blended together. It wasn't just a road, it felt alive under the light, almost as if it sang with every step. The path curved upward and led to a wide, open space at the very heart of the city. At the center of that space, I saw a great throne. It didn't look like a chair, not exactly. It was more like a place of power, glowing brighter than the sun, and resting in that brightness was a being of light. I couldn't see a face. There was no body the way we think of it. But I knew, this was God. He was a radiant, endless light, and yet he felt closer than anyone I had ever known. His presence wrapped around everything. His light wasn't just light, it was love. Pure, holy, powerful love. I could feel it moving through me, seeing every part of me, even the pieces I had buried deep inside. And somehow, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. I felt known. And I felt completely loved. To the left of that light, I saw Jesus. He wasn't sitting at the moment, he was standing beside the throne. He looked like a man, but also more. His face shone with peace and kindness, and there was something in his eyes, something that told me he had known every pain I had ever felt. He didn't speak, but I knew he saw me. His hand was stretched out, as if he were welcoming everyone who came near. All around them were thousands of people, gathered in joyful worship. They weren't forced to sing. They wanted to. Every voice was full of love, praising God, calling out, "Holy, holy, holy are you." They sang as one, not just with music, but with spirit. It was more than sound. It was worship that filled the air like fragrance. And then I saw the angels. Surrounding the throne were creatures unlike anything I had ever imagined. These weren't soft, floating angels with wings like we see in paintings. These were seraphim, holy beings with multiple wings and many eyes. The eyes weren't just on their faces, but on their wings, their arms, all over. It should have looked strange or frightening, but it didn't. It was beautiful. Holy. Their worship was powerful and unending. They moved with grace, their wings flowing like waves, and their eyes never stopped watching the glory of God. I watched in silence, completely overwhelmed. My thoughts couldn't keep up with what I was seeing. My heart was bursting with a feeling I didn't have words for. I wasn't just looking at heaven. I was being embraced by it. The longer I looked, the more I felt the weight of love pressing into me. It wasn't heavy in a painful way. It was deep, full, eternal. I wasn't just a visitor here. I was wanted. Every part of me was welcome. Every broken piece. Every mistake. None of it pushed me away. God had seen it all and still reached for me with open arms. And in that moment, I realized something that would never leave me. Real love doesn't just accept you. It knows you, completely, and still says, "You are mine." After I had floated back down and returned to my place in line, I stood quietly, still overwhelmed by everything I had just seen. I felt like I could have stayed there forever. Every part of me wanted to stay. My heart was full, my soul calm, and the weight I had carried for years felt lifted. I was finally home, or so I thought. The line moved slowly, and I took in everything around me. The people ahead of me, the angel at the gate, the glow of the city, it all felt too perfect to leave. I had no idea how long I had been there. Time didn't exist the same way it does on Earth. All I knew was that I didn't want this to end. Then something unexpected happened. The large angel standing at the gate, the one holding the great glowing book, paused. His expression changed. He looked directly at me. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in confusion, like he was trying to understand something that didn't quite fit. He placed his hand over the pages of the book. They flipped quickly, almost like the wind was turning them, rushing through one by one until they stopped near the end. He traced a line down the page, paused, and then looked at me again. His eyes met mine, and I felt like they saw straight through me. Then he spoke. "Why are you here? You're not supposed to be here yet." His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried power. It filled the space around me. And just like that, I knew what was coming. Before I could respond or even process what he said, his arms stretched out, longer than humanly possible, and reached for me. His hand gently wrapped around my middle, and with one swift motion, he threw me backward. There was no pain, just motion. I was falling, fast, leaving the light, the love, the warmth. It all faded, and then, suddenly, I was back in my body. I woke up on the floor of that bedroom, head pounding, heart racing, surrounded by the weight of my choices. The peace was gone. The love still echoed in my soul, but the distance from it hurt more than I could explain. I lay there, stunned, confused, and heartbroken. I had been in the presence of something holy, and now I was back in a world that felt cold and broken. But even in the pain, something had changed. I had been reminded of what was waiting. And I knew, without a doubt, that my life wasn't over. God wasn't finished with me yet. After that second experience, something in me broke, but not in a way that ruined me. It was the kind of breaking that makes space for healing. For a long time, I didn't know what to do with what had happened. I didn't talk about it. I wasn't ready. I kept trying to live my life like nothing had changed, but the truth was, everything had. I still made mistakes after that. I didn't become perfect overnight. But I couldn't go back to who I was before. The memory of heaven stayed with me. It stayed in the way I looked at the sky, the way I listened to music, even in the quiet moments when I was alone. I could feel it, this pull, this invitation, always calling me back to something greater. Years later, I was at home with my daughter. She was just a baby at the time. I was still carrying the weight of my past, still unsure how to find my way back. Then one day, I heard God's voice, clear, gentle, and strong. Not out loud like someone talking in the room, but in my spirit. It wasn't a whisper or a suggestion. It was Him. And what He said brought me to my knees. He didn't scold me. He didn't shame me. He called me. It was that moment, so full of love and mercy, that changed everything. I cried for a long time. Not because I was scared, but because I felt like a child finally coming home. I saw all the times He had reached out to me, even when I was running. I saw the grace He had poured over my life. I knew I didn't deserve it, but He gave it anyway. That day was my turning point. I gave my life fully to Jesus, not just as someone I believed in, but as someone I would follow with my whole heart. Today, I live with purpose. I study God's Word. I pray every day. I surround myself with people who are hungry for truth and who walk with the Spirit. I'm a part of a community that teaches and encourages spiritual growth, and it's helped me grow in ways I never expected. But more than anything, I've learned to listen, to really listen, for God's voice and to follow where He leads. I don't share my story to lift myself up. I share it because it's real. Because heaven is real. Because God is real. And because His love is unlike anything you'll ever find on earth. If you've ever felt far from God, if you've ever wondered if He sees you or still wants you, I want you to know this: He does. He always has. There is nothing you've done that puts you beyond His reach. He knows you. He loves you. And He's calling you back, just like He called me. You don't have to wait for a moment like mine. You can come to Him now. All it takes is a willing heart, an honest prayer, and a step toward the truth. Heaven isn't just a far-off place for one day. It's a promise. And that promise is for you too.